When they saw him, they worshipped him, but doubted. How can it be that after being with Christ for 3 years in his ministry, witnessing him die and resurrect after he said he would, seeing his miracles, witnessing his divinity, his humanity, that these original disciples, his apostles, can still have their doubts? Jesus is time and time again proving who he is, proving his love for them, and yet they still harbor some disbelief in their hearts. The people, at least in a historical sense, that were literally closest to Christ, still found it difficult to fully believe. This certainly, in a sense, should give us comfort as disciples of that same Lord 2,000 years later, that maybe the disbeliefs or the struggles that I have with God are not so abnormal after all. That maybe struggling with God is a sign of a true, authentic relationship with him. The meaning of the word Israel, God's first chosen people from the Old Testament, is one who wrestles with God. So to struggle with God and to not always be on easy street with him is a sign of a true, authentic relationship. And a keynote difference between a believer and an atheist is that the believer, the Christian, chooses to wrestle with God, chooses to enter the ring with God, while the atheist, the unbeliever, stays on the outside. Growing up in grade school, there were two subjects in which I deeply enjoyed. One was first and foremost gym, and the other one was geography. I always enjoyed studying maps, learning about the different continents and where certain countries are located and so forth. And despite the apparent lack or belief that these disciples had, they still covered their fair share of ground, their fair share of geography. They continued, they went forth, they baptized, they spread the love of Christ through many different nations to many different people. To name a few, post-ascension, Peter traveled around what's modern-day Turkey and then finished his time receiving martyrdom in Rome, being the first pope of the church. Andrew was reported to be around the Black Sea area, around modern-day countries like Armenia and Ukraine. Thomas went out as far as India. And Matthew, Simon, and Jude were all reported to have taken their work to modern-day Northern Africa. And we're all, of course, familiar with the many mission trips that the Apostle Paul did around the Mediterranean. Belief in God has spread because the heroes of our faith, the people that have come before us, have given their yes, have chosen to take up their cross and spread that belief, not only to the people they were dealing with at that time and the immediate situation, but has spread through 2,000 years of church history to us today. You could even then recall the Canadian martyrs coming from France about 1,500 years later, who gave their continual yes, and not only helped to convert the people now, but are a big part in why we're sitting here today. There's countless stories of men and women who, through the encouraging word of a pastor, a mentor, a teacher, a friend, a coach, have been able to discover a religious vocation, or at least discern it. Or couples that have been together for decades due to the courage of one having the courage of one of them to go and speak to the other. So the decisions that we make now truly make an impact into the future. One story that sticks out in particular is the story of Mother Teresa. And many know of her mission work with the poor, but before that, not many people know that she's with the Loreto sisters for over 20 years, mainly working in the educational sector of things. And then during a train ride in 1946, on the way to make her annual retreat, she would receive what she named to be a call within a call, where she would hear the voice of the Lord asking her or inviting her to satiate the needs of the poor, the most needy, in both a spiritual and material sense. And then 2 years later, through a time of testing or probation, you can say, the order would be official, and she would leave the confines of the Loreto convent and go into the streets of Calcutta to be that light, the light of Christ to the poor. The order itself would eventually soon in 20 years spread to every single continent and include not just sisters, but priests, brothers, married people, many lay workers, and so forth. And through all of her work, she would experience what is sometimes, or what is commonly known, as in Catholic circles, as the dark night of the soul, where the basic, it's, despite a constant recourse to prayer, recourse to the sacraments, truly living out one's vocation, the individual feels a lack of presence of God within the soul, within the mind and the heart. But despite that, not only on that train ride, she gave her yes every day, waking up every hour, giving her yes to her vocation to serve Christ through the needs of the poor. And by the time of her death in 1997, her community of sisters would number just under 4,000 in 120 different countries. So through her constant yes, she was able to make a concrete, irrevocable, and amazing difference in the world. For most of us, though, God isn't calling us to make a global difference like the early apostles or like Mother Teresa. And it could sound like a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true that he's calling us through his grace to give our yes in our current circumstances where we find ourselves today. And so that we grow closer to God and the people that he has directly placed in our life also grow closer to him. And we're assured of his guidance and constant support every day because as he says in today's gospel, behold, I'm with you always until the end of the age. Christ saying this as he ascends to be with his Father are what seems to me some of the most powerful words in scriptures, because aforementioned, those apostles, those disciples that were, acted, at least at Christ's death, quite cowardly, and despite all the proof and the knowledge given to them, the privilege they had, still harbored disbelief in their souls. But after these words were spoken, post-ascension and post-Pentecost, something truly changes in them. They're given a new strength and a new vigor that was clearly not present before. It was a process for each of them to come to know Christ, to believe in him, to walk with him, and finally to have the courage to go out and be him to the world. As many of us are familiar with the story of Saul, who turned into Paul, and was a great persecutor of the church, orchestrating the basically killing of Christians. When Christ met him on the road to Damascus, when he received his conversion, Christ said to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? He didn't say, why are you persecuting, James and Thomas and Robert and so on and so forth. He said, why are you persecuting me? Saying the church and Christ, they're one. So you could say in a sense, at the ascension, Christ never left. He gave to the apostles back then, all the believers, the 2,000 years of church history, to us now, to truly be the living, breathing body of Christ in the world today.